some point tonight. Great, got it. So Beverly, would you be kind enough, as more people join, to remind us that this is being recorded? Because I'll forget that. So maybe just pipe in another 15 minutes and say, excuse me, but I want to remind all that this is recorded. I do believe that as they log on, they will get a recording notice and have to agree to it. But it's not always the case. So,
well, Kirk Rick Stevenson here. Does that mean we can't cuss?
Oh, this is not public radio. You can do whatever you want.
Oh, okay.
Beverly may mute you forever after that, Rick. So there will be consequences, but you won't be arrested by the. Okay. All right. We'll go ahead and get going. So thank you very much. I appreciate you all for being here. You know, it's a night where we could all be doing something else, but oddly enough, you all are interested in land use and zoning issues, which is a peculiar bailiwick of urban planning. And the more people that get involved in it realize just how important it is. So tonight we're recording this so that we can post it on the LPCA website, landpark.org. It'll be under land use. It'll be on our YouTube station. And we're going to share it with our friends and collaborators at other neighborhood associations. So any of you, and a lot of you represent other neighborhood associations, in particular in District 7, but there are several people here from outside District 7, and you're very welcome, and we'd be happy to share that with you, the recording. What we're going to be talking about tonight is about issues, positions, and potentials for collaboration as neighborhood associations on land use and zoning proposals, and actions of the city, strategies of the city that are being proposed in the general plan update and the 2021 housing bills from the state of California, and how those housing bills affect the general plan strategies. And we need to think about that now because the city is thinking about it quite a bit and having to determine how they're going to marry the two. So I'm going to hopefully give you the salient points, a little bit of housekeeping. I'm going to cover this in sections. So I'm going to tell you what the section is that we're going into at the beginning of each section. As you have questions, I'd like you to just write them in the chat. And they don't have to be in complete sentences. Beverly will interpret for you. She speaks 12 languages, I think. And and at that point, we'll get the questions answered in each section. So if you would hold the questions until we arrive at that section, we're going to be talking, as I said, about all the major strategies in the land use and housing element and how they affect all of the different state regulations.
Kirk, one quick thing.
Yes, Bev.
If people will be sure, if they have questions they want to go in the chat, they address them to everyone, because if they address them to you, I will not necessarily see them.
Oh, great.
And
okay.
if you're wanting me to monitor that, we'll need that.
All right, great. So press address everyone when you write a question. Okay. I wanted to first start on a note and just say, really, what is our purpose? This is very important. The city has a purpose that is, to much degree, self-serving. It is preserving its institutions, and it's endeavoring to build a great city. That's not necessarily the same as our purpose, which is to preserve and enhance the livability and quality of life of our neighborhoods. So I want to just give a little background on what's the different points of view here that are being represented. So we advocate for the preservation and enhancement of livability and the diversity of our neighborhoods. We're proud of the diversity, how each one is different. It's what adds all the color really to our lives and to Sacramento. We don't want a one-size-fits-all sense of community. We want to choose a neighborhood and see if we can aspire to go live in it. So we're preserving the quality and character of existing neighborhoods, developed through community land use and zoning decision-making. That's community decision-making. Developing walkable neighborhood centers and transportation corridors through increased mixed-use residential density. In other words, through a vibrant, dense, populated corridors and centers in our communities. We want to create increased housing diversity and choice through the placement of what's called missing middle housing as a traditional transition between our urban corridors and our single-family neighborhoods. And we want to do that through community decision-making and placement. We're advocating for housing affordability through the development of progressive building standards, such as you've seen recently, which is 5-story buildings built out of wood construction. That's really quite progressive. Progressive permitting fees and nonprofit development partnerships for building more affordable housing. We want to advocate for equity through city investments in complete neighborhoods and programs that support homeownership. That should be distributed broadly throughout the entire 100 square miles of the city. And we want to support the benefits of proven planning strategies for sustainable growth, suggesting alternatives and mitigation for the negative consequences of change, because there always are negative consequences. So the issues that we're going to discuss in the positions tonight are to do that. And they have to be done on and considered on a schedule. And the city sets that schedule. So I want to give you an idea of what the next 3 or 4 months look like. Over the next 3 months, we're going to unveil, the city will unveil the land use and housing strategies for the general plan update through 2040. So it's going to be the next 20 years of our development. And it's only reviewed every 5 years. So a lot will happen in 5 years. So our decisions on what we approve as a community in our community plans, each of which is a section of the general plan, it can't be more important. Our community here that we're talking about is called Greater Land Park. Someday they may change the name of that. I always think of it as the parks. It is not the same as District 7. The parks includes Hollywood Park, Oak Park, Land Park, Sierra Curtis Park, Upperland Park, Southland Park. But now D7 doesn't include all those anymore, and instead includes the pocket. So right now, when we talk about the general plan, the reason that everyone's open to this review is because it's for all the parks. Matt Hertel has written a letter, which I will send to you, which describes the schedule that we're on. And it has a peculiar element to that schedule. And that is that there are going to be 5 studies that are going to come out over the springtime. And these studies are going to be to answer the challenges that we have posed to the city so far on their strategies. We've challenged them to say that some of their strategies are going to cause gentrification. in places like Mangan Park and Oak Park, that some of the strategies are going to feed into the megalithic purchase of single-family homes by BlackRock, a private equities company that has purchased over 4,000 homes in Sacramento, predominantly all in the last 3 years, in an attempt really, truly to gain a dominant position, and to a certain degree in the rental market, single family home rental market, and to a certain degree to be able to set the price on single family homes in the rental market. And in the meantime, has outbid with cash most of our first time home buyers that want to buy a home for hopefully under $500,000. They're purchasing almost everything on the market that is $400,000 to $600,000 right now. Our city has not responded to this at all. And yet you find that they are extremely interested in equity, the ability for all peoples to have home ownership and build generational wealth through home ownership. At the same time, they take no action to stop the purchase of homes by Wall Street financial investors. Matt has talked about developing what we'll call studies to answer the questions of how does the city's strategy lead to affordability? How will it lead to a better mix of racial equity and integration in the various communities? How will the increase in density be supported by our existing infrastructure? These kinds of questions the city has not been able to answer. And so they are now going to study it. And the answers to us may come to us after we've been asked to actually vote on the community plans and the strategies. That simply will not do. And as communities, we can't allow that to happen. The stakes are too high. We need to have the answers to our questions before we support the city plans. What does deserve our support? And I think this is really important because as associations, we do advocate for the enhancement and preservation of our communities and the quality of life in our city. So what do we to support? How do we do that? And there are a number of things that all of us should be supporting. The 2035 general plan that we're currently living under, and which is the foundation for all land use and zoning ordinances in the city, they all have to agree, they all rest on the foundation of the general plan. And the last one, the one that we live under now, the 2035 plan, has the principles of livability and complete neighborhoods. Now, what determines livability? If that's a performance criteria by which we're going to grade our city, how do we measure it? Well, that's very difficult. And basically, it gets back down to asking the residents. We ask community residents whether what they think about their quality of life and livability. And therefore, we are the ones that determine that. And we know that because we live here. We support the 2040, the new general plan principles of equity and sustainability, preservation and enhancement. So those are four major principles that are in our current general plan. But I don't think you'll find many programs about preservation and enhancement. You'll find 90% of the programs are what they're proud to say are radical change. We support the development of first-time buyer programs and ADU construction financing assistance for disadvantaged communities subject to gentrification. It's exactly what Oak Park needs. It's exactly what Mangan Park needs for a first-time buyer to get in there and buy a house and be able to build an ADU and start to build some wealth. Financial security is a wonderful thing, and first-time homebuyer programs are wonderful things. What fits for each different neighborhood? Maybe it should be determined by the neighborhood. We support the living wage because all the problems we're talking about of affordability is because that, well, more than 60% of, probably close to 70% of the population of Sacramento live in the bottom half or under the mean average income. And the mean average income is fundamentally what sets market rate prices for housing. So if you're building a rental property and you've got apartments, you price them at 30% of the mean average income because that's what is affordable to most people for their housing. And then you have good demand for your property. So how come an individual that lives under the mean income can't afford the house? Well, it's because the new promise, the California promise, the American promise, really has changed from if you work hard, you will be able to have your own place and get ahead. But the fact is, it's changed. If the two of you work hard, you can now get ahead and have a place of your own. It takes, for most people, two incomes to achieve that $70,000 a year mean income, which allows them to afford a $2,100 two-bedroom apartment. Okay, so that's how the math works. So now it's forcing people to partner up, to be married, to be able to have the American dream, because the average wage earner in Sacramento that works out there at, I don't know, at the Amazon distribution center or whatever, makes about half that. So it takes two incomes to be able to afford a house. So we believe in a living wage, which is getting the wages up. And we think that really we shouldn't be talking that much about the challenge of how to build affordable housing, because that is almost impossible. In today's market, with the cost of land and with the cost of building materials and labor, as we try and build our way out of a housing crisis, we drive up the cost of materials, labor, and land as we increase its potential by increasing the density allowed on that land. And so we are chasing a goal that we can't keep up with. We can't build our way into affordability. Therefore, the only way we can get there is by giving something up. And the thing we should be giving up is profit. Blackstone owning 4,000 homes in Sacramento for the profit of renting them out. There's no reason that should be. We should have never allowed housing, as the mayor is so apt to point out, housing is a human right. But at the same time, he allows it to be a financial instrument for Wall Street to invest in. I don't understand how those 2 points of view square. But the only thing we can give up right now is profit. But I think as we look at what we can do is we can manage reasonable rate of return on investment. And that in itself should be the role of the housing industry now, rather than as a generator of profit. We request and we believe in and support investment in infrastructure that equalizes and completes neighborhoods. This idea that there are neighborhoods, some neighborhoods that are more beneficial than others because they have a park, or because they have a community college, or because they have a light rail station. Frankly, or because they have a community center or a community pool. As many of our neighborhoods as possible should be complete. They should have the open space that is required for human being. And we have ratios for that in our building in the sense of parks, recreation facilities, infrastructure, lighting, safety, police patrol and protection, all of these things. Every neighborhood should be complete. We shouldn't have people having to migrate from one neighborhood to other or work their way out of an incomplete neighborhood to get to a complete neighborhood. That is the job of the city. To build a great city is to build great neighborhoods. And that is in our existing general plan. And we don't need to change that strategy. That's a good strategy and it's been around for decades. Finally, we assert our right to self-determination and urban planning at the neighborhood level. A final advocation that doesn't really have to do with single-family housing, but I want to bring it up because it's the solution to the city's proposal to integrate missing middle housing throughout our single-family neighborhoods, is that we support the revitalization of public transportation in our community corridors through high-density residential and mixed use development. That's for Broadway. That's for Freeport. That's for Sutterville. We should have much higher density on those. They should have excellent public transportation running down the middle of them. The cost of living on those corridors in 5-story buildings and 4-story buildings with good public transportation, the total cost of living for housing and transportation to get people to their jobs and back should be minimal. And that will be done by having those two things combined. And has been many, many great cities. And today is the focus of many cities. Boise, Idaho, its whole build-out plan is on community corridors. The mayor of San Jose has requested that their planning department have a complete plan for growth through community corridors, as well as looking at the alternative of mixing into higher density and residential, which some of their people want. So that is important. And on the 3rd of February, our next meeting is going to be rather visual. And it will have representation of community corridor development and what it looks like, and the transition of scale that goes from anywhere from up to 6-story buildings down to single-family neighborhoods, and how that happens in a single block and what that looks like, and how we place missing middle housing on the backside of corridors as a transition of scale between the large buildings on the corridor and the single-family neighborhood. I want you to think about these things, and any of you who want talking notes on these. I'm happy to send you the talking notes so that you can think about them with your own neighborhood association, because we need to write letters of support to the city council. And what we want to do is we want to support positive things in growth. We want to have our own strategies, our own vision of how we grow our communities. And that's really what we're going to need to do over the next 3 months, is develop our own vision. And I want to give you starting points for that. So those we need to start that discussion now. I want to talk to you a little bit now about the housing element and about how it relates to our regional plan from SACOG. But first, I'd like to take any questions that have to do with these vision statements that I've just stated. Okay.
Actually, I have a question, Kirk.
Yes, Kathy.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you, is that your statement or is that a statement of the Land Park Community Association? And can you tell us a little bit about how you came to that?
Yeah, I sure can. It's really fascinating. That statement started 2 years ago, and it started with a general plan update. And the city, in its old style, started the general planning process from the bottom up. And that's always the way the process has gone until this year. But they started it from the bottom up, and they asked each one of the 10 communities that make up the 100 square miles of Sacramento, ours being called Greater Land Park, to come up with our own vision and issues statement. And so I helped organize a work group to do that. That work group actually comprised of 51 individuals, and it included people like the Parks Commissioner from the area, the Vice President of City College, a number of prominent business people from the areas, several developers that live in the area, but about 40 of them were people just like us. And we met and we discussed what the issues and concerns were and what our visions were of where we wanted to be by 2040 and how were we going to get there. What might be a few strategic points of how we were going to get there. We wrote an 8-page document and we sent it to the city, and the city responded with accolades. We got a lot of comments from the Planning and Design Committee and from the commissioners from this area and from the city general planning staff that they were very impressed and really liked that. And we haven't heard from them since.
Thank you.
So
thanks.
There's an answer.
Thank you.
I see, Beverly, another question that popped up.
Yeah, there's a question from Andrea. Are you really willing to advocate that the city of Sacramento set a profit limitation on rental housing owners? How would you separate Blackstone-owned properties from so-called mom and pop landlords who may have pretty high profits as well? What other industry profits are limited by government? Healthcare is not a problem. So that's from Andrea.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Andrea, and I wish I was the guy that was able to answer that. There are a number of programs right now that are being developed by various cities that to some degree are limiting the investments by real estate investment trusts and private equity in housing. There are fees, transactional fees, that are being levied on the transactions as opposed to that. I don't know. I don't have the answer. I have been communicating this trend to the council, and the council does exactly what you've done. They've asked me for my solutions. Now, that's above my pay grade. All I can tell you is that 4,000 houses purchased in the last, actually 2019, 2020, and 2021 by one organization. And I'm happy to show you the map. And Andrea, you'll be happy to know that none of them are in our neighborhood. None of them are in our district. These are all in the surround outside the city center. So I don't know. And whether it's our fight or not, I can't tell you that either. But it is a problem, given that those people are starting to gain enough market share that they will set rental property values. And I certainly don't believe that it is something that we should concern ourselves when it comes to small investors or independent individuals that own two houses because they bought a house for their kids, and when they grow up, they want them to be able to live in Curtis Park or something. But it's a great question. I don't have the answer.
Well, we're going to have to figure out an answer.
Yeah, the city will have to figure out an answer on that.
Jennifer has her hand up.
Yes, Jennifer.
Good evening. Yeah, I have two suggestions to add into our vision statement.
Okay.
Some things for every neighborhood to be considering, which is one, the type of housing the city is lowest in is low cost and affordable housing. Missing middle would be great, but we absolutely must have low cost and affordable housing. So I would like everybody to consider making strong requests for a strong inclusionary zoning policy, such as anytime you want to build more than 4 units on a parcel, one of them, at least one of them, 25% of those units anywhere in the city must be a low cost or affordable unit. Because here is also what is going on. Parts of the city are being designated as magnet locations for large scale, large number of units, low cost or affordable housing, essentially coming really close to 1960s style Chicago projects, which we know are bad for cities. They are extremely unhealthy in many, many ways. There is implied in the housing element, and I suspect we're going to see it in the land use element as well, the modern day take on economic redlining. We need to collectively take a big stand about that and make certain that the city abides by their implied promise of the 2040 general plan, which was through a greater array of housing types, there would be more affordable housing. Well, okay, then all of these developments need to have some affordable, some missing middle, some market rate, some above market rate. We need to make certain that all of our development that's going in, that's more than just an ADU in the backyard. You're talking more than 4 units, then those 4 units need to be mixed price points, including low cost and affordable.
Thank you, Jen. I do think that that's a great point. And, we have to realize that developers will always build the market rate and the highest level of market rate that they can. That's the nature of their mission, is to make profit on that building. And that means to get the highest revenue possible. So the only way that you build really below market rate housing is through regulation and through partnerships, nonprofit partnerships. We were very happy to see just recently the state fund 150,000 units on Broadway. 150 units on Broadway. And that was a big fund, I think it was 29 million that they gave to the Methodist Church to build a development on 19th Street. But we need more nonprofit partnerships to take care of that, or we need to build it by regulation, inclusionary items. And thank you, Jen, for suggesting that. You had a second suggestion?
Yes, also that we all start paying attention to state and federal environmental quality screenings as far as where new development is going to be going, because the other half of this concern about low cost and affordable housing is that the areas the city is designating as, you know, very likely good spots to put most of our low cost or affordable housing also happen to scan out on both state and federal environmental checks as being very toxic. We're basically talking about putting our poorest residents in the most unhealthy locations that we have. The 102 acre property at 3100 Meadowview Road that the city just spent several $1 million purchasing from the federal government for a homeless safe ground, followed by an affordable housing complex, turns out to be one of the most toxic parcels of land in the nation.
Well, thank you for that point of view, and which leads us right to the next thing I want to talk about, which is the environmental negative, the negative environmental impacts. I'll get to Bruce.
Okay.
The negative environmental impacts of the housing element. But before we go there, Bruce, do you have something you'd like to point to?
Yeah, I have a question. I have a question. It's actually trying to get some of your reaction to what I've been thinking about, and that is, as urban land values, housing has become extraordinarily difficult for first-time buyers, and Sacramento's at the forefront, it seems, even for rentals, but certainly for new housing. Better than the Bay Area, but nevertheless, for first-time homeowners or who would-be homeowners, it's probably out of a lot of people's reach. And what that means is, or what I suspect it means, is that the big investment firms have understood this before we all did, and have been putting money into buying up properties for rentals, because the American dream for most people is no longer available, and people will be forced to rent like they do in Europe very commonly. Are we at that point? Is that part of the background important to understand in terms of what we're talking about?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think we are at a tipping point. And the tipping point, I think we don't have Bill Berg with us tonight from Preservation Sacramento, but he has an excellent slide presentation on the value of old housing. And matter of fact, even in the SACOG handbook, they talk about building smaller housing that eventually will become affordable. In other words, as it ages. And there is no doubt today that older single-family homes, which are still on the market today, they were on the market on 24th Street, down below City College, Carlson Track, the backside of Hollywood Park. They were on the market for $350,000 a year ago. There are $450,000 now. They went up $100,000 this year. And they did that because the people were making all cash offers and bidding the price of those houses up, investors, as well as first-time home buyers. So yes, that's happening. And yes, we're at a point where really the housing as an investment, that those people want a guaranteed market. They would like it that 50% or more are required to rent. You know, they can't work their way out of rental.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we're rapidly approaching that. The same is just the difference between new and old. You know, what a small house, or let's just say a 1,500 square foot house that's old today, you can still get them in many places for $450,000 to $500,000, old houses. A new townhouse with no yard, much higher density, much smaller land footprint, they're starting at $700,000 in Sacramento. So the differences between new and old, which is the difference in housing material costs and labor costs and requirements and fees and technology that are in these new homes. And so building new is not giving us any affordability. We can't build our way into affordability. And as far as I can find out, we can't design our way there either. I mean, there's a big study that was recently done by the state Office of Accounting, and they fundamentally said the only way you can possibly build the least affordable, the most affordable housing in California is 5-story and above, stick-built, wood-built construction, smallest possible footprint for studios and multi-bedroom apartments. And that's exactly what's being built now.
Yeah, thank you. Did I also read, was it in the Be an Op-Ed piece about if we really want to keep up with the housing needs, especially regarding the homeless, people who can't afford any housing, that the California needs to spend, is it $18 billion a year, every year for 10 years? Did anybody else read that figure?
I did not, but the hole we have dug is deep. You know, we should have been having this conversation in 2009.
Mm-hmm.
The city should have been buying up those houses, not Wall Street. The state should have backed bonds to secure loans on that house or keep people in those houses. And today, the thing that we should be working on the most is keeping people in houses, because there are people dropping out of their homes every day.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
one thing from family in Europe is it's so highly regulated there too. It's a very different situation. Even if they have a lot of people in rentals, it's so regulated and protected that people are at least protected in their housing for quality and for access to parks and public spaces. And because I have a lot of family in Europe, and they talk about the dramatic difference in that we haven't shown a willingness to turn towards that level of regulation that makes housing a right, as you talked about earlier.
Yeah, it's not a financial asset for the markets. There it is very, the inclusionary laws are incredible. I mean, when anything's built, there is, if the city has a need for 30% market rate, 30% workforce, and 30% subsidized, that's the way the building is built. And that's by law. So it's very, very inclusionary. Okay, great questions. We have a lot of ground to cover.
I have just one quick question about housing size and how, if you're going to get to that at any point, because so many of these really giant houses are still being permitted and so on. And I'm wondering how housing size in terms of all this broad planning.
That's a good question. We had certain fees that went on large automobiles a few years back. If it was a certain gross weight. So is there going to be such a thing for housing? It's possible. Right now, housing is a financial shelter, again, a financial asset. So you get people, from Hollywood that collect houses and as big as they can possibly build them because they're sheltered. A lot of them are sheltered from liability lawsuits and many, many things. So right now, we're working towards a different direction, Beverly. It's different. than penalizing that. All right, any other questions just sort of on goals? Okay, then I'm going to move on, and we are going to cover a lot tonight on the Sacramento housing plan and then the state housing plan. I want to talk just for a moment, a quick moment, about the environmental and negative environmental impacts that Jennifer brought up. The housing element of the general plan was passed with a negative declaration, which means the city declared there was no negative impacts to increasing the density 2 to 4-fold in the city. No negative impacts at all. Now, I just want to point out that what a negative impact is in environmental impact report is not all about the environment. The city has many, many plans. It's got transportation plans, infrastructure plans, energy plans, sustainability plans, emergency response plans. And what the environmental impact report does is it looks at this development plan of a project or of a housing plan, which is to increase density throughout the city. And it says, how does this affect our other plans? And it says it doesn't at all. Well, this is insanity, because we all know that it does. If you take a look at even Jeff Harris's own neighborhood of River Park, they are should we be doubling the density of River Park and adding lots more cars to the street, so it makes it more difficult for emergency equipment to go there, where it's already designated a high-risk fire zone from the American River Parkway. All those houses in there are in a high-risk fire zone. And yet this was never even brought up for discussion. What about our double sewer and stormwater systems in our old neighborhoods? You know, is there any impact on those if we're going to double the density of the neighborhood? Should we be adding 5,700 new housing units a year as fast as we can by regulation, by matter of fact, by determination from the state that we have to build those here in Sacramento, 5,700 units a year during the worst drought since 1977? Well, my God, we should at least just do the math and do the calculations. And therefore, I want you, when the general plan comes out, it will address some of these things in the overall umbrella of the general plan. The housing plan denied that there was any impact, but we're going to need to ask those tough questions in the general plan. Okay, I'm going to move on right now to SACOG and the regional designation of how many houses we need to build and why. Where did we get this idea that we were going to be able to build our way into affordability? The SACOG Housing Toolkit is the primary guidance and supporting reference for the city's housing strategy. They refer to it endlessly. Now, we did a PRA request, public records request of the city, and asked them for the references that supported their strategy for increasing the array of housing and densities in single-family neighborhoods as a solution to affordability and equity, the ability to have increased integration in our communities. And they came back and said, well, we got that from the SACOG toolkit. That was it. And they are very proud of this being radical change. The 2040 general plan is a radical change from the one that we're living under now. A general plan, by the way, that most of us feel has produced a city that is incredibly livable and enjoyable up until the last 3 or 4 years. So what is it about this SACOG toolkit? what it actually appears to be is more guidance rather than a rationale for a strategy or critical strategic support. There is no bibliography for the SACOG housing report. It refers to no other documents, which is remarkable. It's fundamentally taking the direction from the state and allocating it down to the cities without any question at all, and justifying it through, I don't know, there's a great sentence saying that human beings are not rational, they're rationalizing. We can rationalize anything. And they've rationalized it and said, oh, well, you know, newer, smaller should be less expensive than older, bigger. But we're not going to talk about older, smaller. I don't know. You know, they just tell these stories to themselves. So right now, there are no performance. They say these are best practices, but when you read their reports, the best practices are referring to their own cities. They're referring to Roseville and Lincoln and I don't know, other towns, and they're just saying, oh, they're going to try this, or they're thinking about this strategy. There's no proof statement and performance criteria at all for the SACOG strategies. Here's a quote, and this is the only reference to affordability and equity. I'm going to read it to you. Because multifamily and other attached housing types tend to be more affordable than the traditional single-family home, well, not old ones versus new ones, zoning the majority of land for single-family means that some high opportunity neighborhoods remain concentration of affluence, which can perpetuate racial and class inequality. A 2015 UCLA study found that density restrictions via exclusionary zoning directly lead to income segregation of rich, which results in the hoarding of resources, amenities, and disproportionate political power. Lenz, McCanahan, 2016, etc. One article. That was the sole reference study addressing the problem statement that the entire housing plan for Sacramento is based on, that neighborhoods of privilege are hoarding resources. Now that doesn't just sound unbiased to me. It sounds that they assume that a neighborhood has motivation in its actions. So that is their one reference point. And yet the whole problem statement is a red herring. In studies this year from the 2020 consensus, researchers in Berkeley determined that Sacramento was one of only 2 cities in the United States, investigated 119 cities in the 2020 census versus the 2010 census. One of only 2 cities out of 119 that moved from more segregated to less segregated, to more integrated. The other was Aurora, Colorado. And in that study, they said across the US, 54% of municipalities were becoming more segregated. So this proposal, this vision that SACOG has and that the city has, that we're not becoming more integrated, is they're drinking a Kool-Aid. They're buying a statement that is more of a national application than it is to Sacramento. And as a nation, we are worried about equity and integration and barriers to those things. But here's what the researchers finally found, that improvements in Sacramento, the whole 100 square miles, were attributed to increased integration in Land Park, the Pocket area, and the Central City. And we get constantly beat up by the mayor as being privileged communities that have barriers to upward mobility. We do not. We have desirability, and a lot of people are growing their financial stability and way into, yes, a privileged community that has high income. But it is without barriers. The past president of the University of California, the entire system, is a Black man from Land Park. We have the Matsuis from South Sacramento as our senators. There are not barriers to power sharing and upward mobility here. That's a story that's being told. And as far as I can see, there's no justification for it. They go on to say that missing middle housing, new housing is cheaper than old housing, which it is not. And finally, they say that even the city has a misconception of what should be their goal. And the city has a goal of 8 to 12 units per acre, which is moderate density. The SACOG would like something in the 20 to 35 units per acre. In order to achieve the SACOG model, the final thing that they say is missing middle zoning reform can take many forms, but at its core, it means increasing the allowed density of the zoning, allowing higher lot coverage, 75% or more, and minimizing or removing parking. At its core, that's the SACOG strategy. What have we all heard Councilmember Valenzuela say, Councilmember Harris say, the city planning organization say? Except upzoning in residential neighborhoods, we are not going to change the size of the building, the height, the setbacks, or your open space. We're just going to put more people in the same style of building, increase its density. Well, that's a promise that they will not and cannot keep, because they're following the strategy of SACOG, which clearly says we have to give up half of our backyards, that the open space 50% requirement that we have right now in our R1 zoning is going to have to go to 75% lot coverage by buildings. And you can see this in the ADU ordinances, where they proposed first 2,200 square feet of ADUs, then 1,200 square feet completely exempt from lot coverage, and dropped it down to 800 square feet, which was the state's minimum. But they're chewing away at the open space in the backyards, which also means they're chewing away at our tree canopy in Sacramento. So the assurances that have been offered cannot be kept. And we need to ask them, how will they keep those insurances? Because in the face of the SACOG strategy that they're following, it says that they can't, and that they can't have on-site parking. They can't. They need that space for building. And if we don't have on-site parking, how do we achieve a sustainability goal of going to all electric cars by 2035? Are we going to plug in out on the street? We running a cord? I don't know. Yes, questions.
There's
now.
a question from John Bailey, and
Yeah.
it's, are you suggesting that 5-story buildings should line all roads with public transit, such as Freeport, Broadway, Franklin, and Riverside?
Boy, that's a great question, John. And please join us on the 3rd of March to really discuss that, because
It's actually a question from his wife, who's a
Oh,
real
okay.
well, then I'm going to
Mrs.
call you Mrs. Bailey, unless you both use traditional names. But thank you very much for that question. And please do join us on that. And at that point, in between now and then, if you want to express an interest, what we're going to have to do is literally form a commercial corridor work group to determine what our corridors are going to look like in different sections. For example, the section from City College up to McClatchy has very limited problems with parking because of City College. And so we can't have the same density on Upper Freeport that we can have down below Sutterville and down past the new Rayleighs. We can have more higher density there. So there's going to have to be neighborhood adjustments for density and what's called FAR, or the massive buildings. And yes, we're going to have different, and we're going to want them. So for example, if you drive down right now in Oak Park and you look at the new aspects of Broadway and Oak Park, those are 3-story buildings, some 4-story buildings. And there are going to be 5-story buildings elsewhere on Broadway. We hope that there will be 4-story buildings and 3-story buildings around a block or two in the Tower District that has historic buildings in it. We hope that Wayne Thiebaud's studio will be preserved and it won't be hidden behind 5-story houses projects. So yes, there'll be variety, and we want rhythm, rhythm to the buildings. Is there any other questions before we proceed? Okay, thank you. Yes, Jen.
I actually kind of want to make a suggestion, because I was listening to some of the things that you were saying.
Yeah.
And I think we can add to it, such as what the actual plan is. I recommend everybody goes and looks at the House Sacramento website, which is the chapter of Cal YIMBY. And Cal YIMBY is very much a part of helping to frame the city of Sacramento and the SACOG vision of development. And Cal YIMBY has put out on their House Sacramento website.
Jen, I want to interrupt you if I can. I think that a number of people are going to suggest references that we look at. And I would like to collect those and send them out to everybody. So if you could give that to me, I will send them out as a follow-up. We have about 20 minutes left and a lot of ground to cover. And I don't want people to have to write all this down and get it wrong. So
I will just finish up my statement really briefly, which is they have a simple graphic on their website about, if you make this much money, this is the kind of house that you can have. Essentially, they make the statement that in Sacramento, if you have an income above 120,000, you can still have grass and trees. And we are going to have a city that is going to be economically segregated into neighborhoods that have grass and trees. And people are not going to be asked to give up their grass and trees because they're rich enough to afford grass and trees. But other sections of town are going to be designated for lower income, middle income people. And if you make less than 120,000, then your neighborhood is gradually over time not going to have grass and trees. You don't warrant them, you don't have the money. So yeah. I don't think Land Park has to be worried about losing their grass and trees, as long as the people who live there can make more than $120,000 a year. It's going to be the current District 5 and District 8 that have been designated as redevelopment zones through redistricting. We are going to have a problem. And I am very much hoping that District 4 and District 7 will consider to put their significant organizational abilities to the benefit of the entire South area and help out District 5 and District 8 in what I fear is a redevelopment onslaught for us, because our incomes do not exceed $120,000 according to Cal YIMBY. Thank you very much.
I thank you on that. And certainly in various neighborhoods, I'm an old New York boy, and, nobody had a backyard there. But we all depended upon the 1 square block parks that were about 3 blocks apart, one after another. We depended upon those. So that's what I mean about complete neighborhoods. There might be neighborhoods that are built taller and denser, but boy, oh boy, they ought to have an offset. The need for open space is a ratio that every human being has, and that has to be satisfied in one way or another. So thank you, and please forward that to me, Jen. I think it's important right now, we were just talking about where we're going to place missing middle housing, and this idea of these commercial corridors. So as I worked on these elements with places like Sierra Curtis, they did a great job of describing a neighborhood planning process. And I think that really is necessary. And I think that answers the question that we just had. Will all the corridors look uniformly the same? 5-story canyons, if you will. What does the back side of those look like? What does the first block look like moving into the single family neighborhood? And the answer is no, they're not all going to look alike. And the answer is for livability, walkability, and the desirability of our community centers and our community corridors. And we all have centers and corridors. For Land Park, it's the Tower District, and it's on the other end, it's the Sutterville Sprout Center, and on the other side, it's over near Taylor's. And these are our community centers. They're on the corridors of Freeport, Broadway, Sutterville. So the community centers have to be dense enough to really support the commercial organizations there and develop a walkable community, a truly walkable community. And that can be done. The community corridors have to have excellent public transportation up and down them. And they have to have nodes along them that are the community centers. So anyway, that's all going to should be designed, as Sierra Curtis pointed out, through the neighborhood planning process. And I think that's important. And so on the 3rd of March, we're going to try and initiate that. We're going to try and pull together neighborhood work groups to work on a vision for the corridors, because the city is going to ask us a very tricky question, and they already have. What FAR should we have on the corridors? Now, translate that to English, please. But what we're talking about is how high, how thick, how massive should our buildings be on the corridors? And the best way to do that as a people is to get out the Legos and make little models of what it looks like to move up and down a rhythm of a corridor. What does it look like on the corridor and then moving out into the single family neighborhoods? The Legos will show you it drops down. There's a transition of scale, and it opens up as you progress away from it. So we're going to have fun with Legos. Also at that meeting on the 3rd, I'm going to have photographs and videos of our corridors and of our centers, and some examples in other towns of what really good looking corridors look like and good centers. And I hope you all participate in that. So what is our community alternative? Well, one is to do it from the ground up, and that's the community planning process. And the other is to take a little bit more broad brush approach, and we'll be looking at this too, and say that we could go ahead and upzone the block that is adjacent to the community corridor, and have and do it this way. Say any lot that is adjacent to a multifamily lot, any current single family lot adjacent to a multifamily lot can accommodate higher density duplexes, triplexes, or quads, what the city wants. But it has to be already adjacent to a multifamily location. Most multifamily locations are adjacent to mixed use commercial and residential. So you see the transition going on just as one is adjacent to the other. So that's another way we're going to be looking at it on the 3rd. So between now and then, we're going to be asked, are we going to support the housing strategy of upzoning our single family residential neighborhoods with missing middle, triplexes, and quads? And the answer that we're suggesting is no, we're not. No to upzoning, no to that broad brush. That does not preserve our neighborhood. They're going to come back and they're going to say, oh, yes, we are. We're just going to fit more people in the same building envelope. And we're going to say, no, you're not, because SACOG says you're not. You're going to give up our 50% open space. And we're going to make them speak truth on that.
Kurt,
Yes.
how much can we use things like canopy, open space accessibility proportional to the number of people, and even issues around climate change that the city is claiming that they're highly concerned about, to do pushback, not just for neighborhoods like Curtis Park or Land Park, but also for what Jennifer was talking about in Mangan and Meadowview and so on, where they're pushing for a much higher density.
Thank you, Bev. That's a great question. I mean, what you're asking is, aren't there elements of the whole general plan, the vision of the city, that will contradict this higher density of single family neighborhoods? And there are. As I said, the sustainability and of parking for electric vehicles, the sustainability to maintain Sacramento's tree canopy and grow it, the concept of complete neighborhoods and doing tree planting throughout neighborhoods that don't have trees right now. So they're going to be confronted. The problem right now is that these various strategies are being designed by different elements of this. They're not yet truly starting to bring them together, apply 5 different plans to one community at a time and say, how will they work together? And the fact that you're bringing up, Beverly, is that in many cases, they won't work together. They'll work at odds with each other. And we need to demand that they reconcile that and have good judgment in what we approve. I would like to move on now to make a comment about additional dwelling units. These have been the first of the state housing laws. And it was probably a great start and something that led to the other housing laws. But this idea that we've all had that we would like a place for either elderly people to be able to move into, let the kids move into the big house, or vice versa, keep a young person that's just starting out that might not have a family yet close to his original family out in the back in what's called a granny flat or an additional dwelling unit. These are great ideas. It's also traditionally how many teachers and very important elements of our what we call workforce get housed because they can't afford a larger place. They need it. The land is already written off in the value of the land. It runs with the house. It doesn't run with the ADU. So the ADU really has no land cost, and it's small. So it has those two benefits. It is new, and therefore it incurs the new labor and materials costs. But the interesting thing was when we did propose, okay, maybe as a state, we can allow ADUs anywhere, there became people that went into the business. So now there are companies that are building panelized ADUs that they'll deliver them to the backyard. And they're stackable units, but a lot of them are designed to fit within the state regulations of 16 feet in height. Now, we have a regulation of 35 feet in single family neighborhoods. And this is what you're hearing all the complaints about. If you look at our quadrant right now of faces, imagine going in a corner and building a 35-foot tower so that Eric is looking in on Mimi and Bruce and Jeff with his 35-foot tower, his 3-story ADU that he's very proud of. Now, imagine that there is an alleyway between Eric and Bruce and Jeff, and he were to build that 35-foot place, and the bottom story was the garage, and it went into it. Well, that might bother Mimi next to him, but it wouldn't bother the other two. So it's a lesser of two evils. But what I'm suggesting at this point is that this policy that the city went to, saying that R1 zoning allows for a 35-foot house, and so we're going to allow the same for the ADU. Well, that's poppycock, because the ADU has 4-foot setbacks, or can be built right in the corner if that's where the original garage was, which happens in a lot of older neighborhoods. So it should have never been allowed. It was a radical oversight. The house that is 2 stories plus a peaked roof and is 32 feet long is set back 20 feet from the front, and it's set back the whole remaining 50% of the lot from the back, and generally 8 foot from the side. And the other house is also 8 feet, so 16 feet away from other buildings. That's how the house is centered on the property. And it has nothing to do with putting an ADU right on the property line. So luckily, we have a chance every year to fix zoning ordinances. And we turn in a single package of changes that has a single up-down vote in the council. And generally speaking, those changes are sort of pre-vetted and sent in and done through the planning and design part of the city staff. We're gonna petition for that, reducing the 35 feet. We're going to reduce it. We'd like it to be the 16 feet that is covered by the state ordinance for housing ADUs, unless you're on an alley. And if you're on an alley, then we think that there's an opportunity to build taller, possibly to 35 feet if it's above a garage. So it's 2 stories over 1. But that's the story of the additional dwelling unit. And there were 2 great things that happened with the dwelling unit. We reduced the exemption from lot coverage down to 800 square feet. And there was anywhere from 1,200 to 2,000 square feet that they were looking to be able to take up the backyards of our houses. And that was done through a conversation led by Jeff Harris. So we have him to thank for leading that conversation in the council. The second thing that he led on that was to require off-street parking for ADUs. And the city fundamentally lied to him. I mean, they came back and said, oh, they can't do that because 95% of the city's square miles is in transportation-rich areas that have good public transportation. So it's not allowed by the state ordinance. That's poppycock. For a transportation-rich area, it's required that it has regular bus service every 15 minutes during the drive to work, and that it has light rail, or that it has the availability of car sharing that is in designated distribution centers. There has been only one car share car in all of Land Park, parked over near the park, near the city college for the last 3 weeks. I know because I joined the car sharing and I got the app, and there aren't any around here, but they say since it's in the coverage area of gig cars, it's in a transportation rich area. That's poppycock. So if they want to claim that, they better go ahead and get 30 cars and put them in 3 different locations around Land Park, and then we can talk about it. But until then, it's make-believe. Okay, let's get on to the other housing bills that we have. Let's talk about Senate Bill 8, which nobody knows anything about. I want to talk about 2 housing bills that are oddballs. Senate Bill 8 was Skinner's extension of the Housing Crisis Act of 2019. And so what it did was it extended the designation of a housing crisis out to 2030. And when it did that, it usurped the what's called the Municipal Powers Act of the Constitution of California, which designates that municipalities have the right to police themselves, to have land use designation and zoning regulations that they enforce. That's the Municipal Powers Act. And they usurped it because we're in a crisis in the state of California. So the city took those powers and they did the housing. They started with ADUs and the 2021 Housing Act. So that Housing Act had a variety of elements, but that's what SB 8 did, is it extended the crisis designation so that they could do that. We recommend that the crisis, first of all, we're not building our way out of it. That has become apparent. We have not solved gentrification problems. So the city, as it has admitted, is studying affordability, studying gentrification, studying the impact on infrastructure and combined sewer systems. Right now, asking us to vote on increasing our fees to rebuild that system. You know, they do not have a justification to solve the problem they think they have. And yes, is there an affordability crisis? Absolutely, but they don't have a solution for it, because the only solution really was the one that was proposed years ago, which is state funding and federal funding and city funding for the voucher system and affordability, and building smaller and building with greater density on the corridors, building taller. And, you know, this missing middle is not going to do anything. It's interesting because the city has already admitted that missing middle housing, upzoning R1 neighborhoods, is not required to meet the RENA housing goals. It's just something they have in there. It is political optics, and it looks good to say we're going to all people. But right now we have a initiative that I want to bring to all of your attention. It's called Our Neighborhood Voices is the name of the initiative. And you can read all about it. There's a fine link. You can Google Our Neighborhood Voices, or you can go to Save Sacramento Neighborhoods website, which has a lot of the information on that we have been discussing tonight. And there is a link right there. It's in red right on the front page. If you click on that, Our Neighborhood Voices, it'll tell you all about the ordinance. But what it does is it provides that city and county land use and zoning laws, including local housing laws, override all conflicting state laws, except in certain circumstances regarding 3 areas: the California Coastal Act and the Coastal Commission, the siting of power plants, and the development of water communication and transportation infrastructure projects. That's what it leaves the state with in zoning and land. Okay, so it's important that I think that we get that on the initiative and that everybody becomes aware of it. It brings back our constitutional rights. Senate Bill 9, we all know quite a bit now about. It's the Duplex Law, it's called. And what it allows for is, instead of a duplex on every corner, which we currently have in residential neighborhoods, it's a duplex anywhere in a residential neighborhood. The second thing it allows for is a lot split by right anywhere with a minimum lot size of 1,200 square feet. Now, the average lot size in Sacramento is 5,000 square feet. So a 1,200 square feet lot is teeny, but this is allowed, and it's allowed because it will hold an 800 square foot half a duplex. So duplexes in the state SB 9 law force cities to allow a duplex to be built on any lot, minimum 800 square feet per each side of the duplex. These are relatively small, and to split it down the middle and be able to sell one side. So that's why the lot split is there. But it also allows for an increase in density by allowing you to take your current lot, which may be at 5,000 square feet, divide it in half into 2 2,500 square foot houses, and put 1,600 square foot duplexes on each one. 2 duplexes on one lot. So it's what's called 4 units built on a single family lot. Now, this is starting to sound awfully familiar to us, since that's what the city's been asking for. 4 units on a single family lot. Upzoning. So that's how the state accomplished it, through the duplex back door with a lot split to get 4 units per lot. So we already have that. Since by state law we have it, why do we need an upzoning law, an ordinance in our general plan process? We have a state law that allows for 4 units on a lot. We have an ADU law, which allows a duplex to have 2 ADUs, which is 4 units on every lot. We already have this covered. So why do we need the political lens, that good-looking lens of opening up these restrictive zoning areas that are protecting privileged communities? There does not seem to be any way to we've recommended, and when you're at Save Sacramento Neighborhoods, you will see the recommendations, and that is just a coalition of neighborhood associations that are involved in that. You'll see that in Sacramento neighborhoods that we asked for, if there's going to be a lot split, you're going to build 4 units, we want at least one of them to be workforce housing. That it should be registered affordable housing. That it should have a requirement that it's available to somebody at the 60 to 100% of mean income, that 40% below mean, that it be available for that. The only reason we should be doing that is to be providing places for our teachers and our firemen and our, people that really build the community, to have a place everywhere in the community to live. So affordability should be part of lot splits, and you'll see that there. Senate Bill 10 is something that you need to become aware of, and that's the 3 to 10 unit version of SB 9. And that says that fundamentally, multifamily housing up to 10 units can be built in any single family zone because they have definitions of areas that include 90% of all single family zones. So it's just by nature going to be available. This is an enormous incentive for investors, small investor groups, to buy properties, say in Oak Park, where it's gentrifying, and put up a 10-unit apartment building where a big old house used to be. So SB 10 is should be required to have 20 to 60% affordable housing if it ever does get passed. But right now, we're suggesting that we need to go slow, and that's something maybe we should look at in the next general planning cycle of 2035. But let's take the next 5 years and see how the increase of 4 units available on any single family lot, how that plays out. What are the unintended consequences of that? How do our sewer systems handle that? How do our emergency response vehicles get through our old streets with SUVs parked on either side? We need to see how this plays out. So we say go slow. The other wonderful aspect of SB 8 and SB 10 is they both have elements that say, once you increase density, you cannot go back. So there is no correcting once we introduce new density. And our city should act with caution, and we should progress on increased density with sound judgment. We don't want to make revolutionary changes like the city is so happy to characterize their housing strategies as now. There is no element to correct. SB 478 is the last thing I want to address. And what that does is it is the one that nobody's paying any attention to. And it says very clearly, if you pass the first 3, SB 8, 9, and 10, when you get to 478, there are no regulations where you can refuse a building's permitting. Not lot coverage, not even at 75% lot coverage. You can't use lot coverage not to permit a 10-unit building. You can't use height restriction. You can't use setback. You have to allow and you have to permit these buildings through 2030. And that's SB 478. And what it does say is that's within multifamily housing land use designations or mixed land use designations. Now, we go yippee, right? Because most of us live in single family designations. So don't worry about that, Kirk. That doesn't apply to us. But oh, there's this thing that Matt Hertel every once in a while mentions when he speaks at these forums about the general plan. And it's, oh, we want to facilitate permitting, we want to simplify laws, and we want to simplify the land use designations. Oh my gosh, we have 21 designations for land use. Can't we get it down to 4 or 5? And so you will find that there is the proposal to make all residential mixed use. And when you give up your R1 and go to RMX, 478 takes place and you lose all restrictions on zoning to govern what buildings look like, how close they are, how tall they are, how big they are. Neighborhood character is gone. So we have to protect the R1 status. Simplification is not a justification for the threat that SB 478 poses to neighborhood character. Neighborhoods cannot be preserved under SB 478. I think that should do us for now.
Kirk, Barry
Question.
Boyd posted something and it's too much for me to read. Can you see in the chat? It's near the bottom. It's the last thing that was posted. I don't know if there's a question associated with that or if he's just providing information or if you need to say anything about it.
Okay, just a second. We want to take a look at that because Barry Boyd is a planning and design commissioner. And he, by the way, just so you all know, the Planning and Design Commission writes all of the policies that go get turned into ordinances and then are voted up or down by the council. By the way, they do not represent any particular council member. It is an independent board that stands and represents the entire citizenry. So you can approach any planning design commissioner. What are the zoning requirements? Maximum floor area size for an ADU on a property, excluding garages. Okay.
So he said FYI. In other words, that's just for information for everyone. So that was.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, this is good. So if everybody wants to take a look at that, he's just giving you, he's being a good guy and saying that detached ADUs can be 1,200 square feet. If you have 2 detached ADUs, they can be 600 square feet or some combination each. As long as it does not exceed 1,200 square feet, attached ADUs can be 50% of the primary residence size with a maximum of 850 square feet. So those are those things. Now, what is that you can do those, you can build those, but you still have to leave 50% of the lot open space because you have a lot coverage of 50% still in Sacramento. However, garages are exempt. So if you have a 400 square foot single car garage in the back, and it has a footprint of 400 square feet, you can build a second story on it. And that 400 square feet is exempt from the calculation for open space. And secondly, there's an 800 square foot exemption on top of that for open space. So there's a total of 1,200 square feet that are exempt from open space restrictions. Okay.
Okay, and Jennifer has her hand up.
Yeah. Thanks,
right.
everybody. Thank you for staying on a little bit longer. And if any of you have to leave, I certainly understand that. And I hope to see you on the 3rd. Yes, Jen.
You were talking about SB 10 and to give kind of an update for those who might not know, you've heard about the city having an SB 9 ordinance but we haven't gotten around to talking about an SB 10 ordinance. I suspect it's because SB 10 is tied up in a lawsuit that's being posed by Housing as a Human Right, which is funded by the AIDS Health Foundation. The Housing as a Human Right, it has founded their lawsuit on one, and I suspect a second one, but it's not really quite a public thing. One, which is that SB 10 completely violates the state constitution around land use as a local control matter. So I don't know if we're going to see SB 10 actually go into play. What I think SB 10 does do that's very important is kind of answer some of Kirk's questions about there's no explanation for it. I point to SB 10 and say there is. SB 10 is clearly an end run around the Constitution with containing false statements that we all know are false in order to justify deregulating the development industry in the state of California. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Jen. I want to make a caveat. That is that the information I've shared with you is the best information I've had after talking to over 200 of you in various forums and talking extensively with the city planners and council people and planning and design commissioners. It's my best knowledge. There might be mistakes in it. And also, my adjectives of describing other people's justifications or rationales as poppycock, I hope will be taken with good humor, but nevertheless, my sentiments. So this will be recorded, and I think, Bev, at this point, we can end the recording unless anybody else has a question that they want on the recording. Okay, well then, why don't